Hi everyone, it's Alexis with Project Management Made Simple. In this video, I'm going to answer the question, how does Scrum align to project management? So Scrum is, I like to think of it as another way of doing project management. There's actually quite a bit of overlap with the project management process groups, and I'm going to share that with you all. So we know that there's 5 process groups: initiating, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, as well as closure. At the start of every project, whether you're using the Scrum framework or you're going the traditional way of doing project management, you want to have an initiating period where you're doing discovery, you're understanding the business case, you're documenting a project charter. And so that is not something that changes when we use the Scrum framework. Those conversations are still necessary. What does change is the amount of documentation that you are using in the Scrum framework. Doesn't mean we don't have any type of documentation, but Scrum really leans on lean principles where we are using just the amount of documentation that's needed. So whereas before in traditional projects, you might have a project charter that is several pages long, when we're looking at the Scrum framework, we want to grab just enough information that's going to be valuable. And so next, when we get into the planning process group, this aligns to sprint planning. So either way, like I said, if we're doing traditional or we're doing, using a Scrum framework, we need to plan. Now, the differences here are that with a traditional way of doing things, we're going to plan for all of our work up front. It can take several months to do this, whereas with the Scrum framework, we are planning in detail to the amount that we actually need and we know at a given time. So we will do, some extended planning. We can plan at a very high level for several sprints into the future, but that detailed level of planning that is expected of traditional projects doesn't happen until we actually get into sprint planning, at which point we are going to get into detail around the tasks that need to be done, the information that's needed to be able to complete the sprint. Next is going to be execution. And so within the execution process group, this is where the work is actually done. So this is where the team is going to work between that period of 1 to 4 weeks on the product increment and hopefully achieve the goal that was set forth for the sprint. Next is monitoring and controlling. When we think of monitoring and controlling, we think of inspect and adapt. And Scrum has this as something that is woven throughout all of the Scrum events. And so we'll have things like stand-ups where we're going to understand what did the team do yesterday, what did they do today, and what if any impediments or blockers are they facing that are impeding their success to completing the work that they have planned for. We also have the sprint retrospective, where at the end of every sprint, we take time to look at our process, to look at what's going on with the team and get a better understanding of what has gone well, what can change, and potentially some improvements to identify. And finally, we have our sprint review. Our sprint review goes into both monitoring and controlling as well as closure, but it's an opportunity for us to take a look at the work that we completed and make adjustments where necessary that can then be taken into the next sprint or a further sprint. And finally, our closure process group. As I mentioned, the sprint review is really going to be where we take that time and we close out the items that we had planned for the sprint. Something else I'll mention as a part of monitoring and controlling is going to be our metrics that we use to determine if we are on plan or if we're off plan. And 2 of those metrics are going to be our burn down as well as our velocity. So our burn down is going to tell us on a day-to-day basis how we are progressing towards our sprint goal. Our velocity is actually going to be used as a way to inform us moving forward as we are going into our next sprints about the amount of work that we can comfortably take on and can actually achieve within any given sprint. This was a video answering the question, how does Scrum align to project management? I hope you found it helpful. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave those below in the comments, and I will talk to you all in my next video.